Talking to Strangers, What We Should Know About the People We Don't Know, by Malcolm Gladwell. Picture a sweltering July afternoon in 2015. Sandra Bland is cruising through the endless flat roads of Prairie View, Texas, her silver Hyundai catching the sunlight. She's just left Chicago behind for something better, a fresh job at her old university. This is supposed to be one of those turning point moments, you know? New chapter, new possibilities. She's driving along this quiet stretch near campus when she spots flashing lights in her mirror, a police car, coming up fast. So she does the obvious thing, pulls over to let him by. Except he doesn't go by. Those lights? They're for her. State Trooper Brian Insinia approaches her window, all business but polite enough. "The reason for your stop," he explains, "is because you failed to signal the lane change." Sandra's annoyed. Of course she is. "I was getting out of your way," she tells him. "You were speeding up, tailing me, so I move over and you stop me." Just one of those tense little moments that happens 1,000 times a day across America, right? Except what unfolds next is anything but routine. Sandra lights up a cigarette, trying to settle her nerves. Then comes the question that changes everything. "You mind putting out your cigarette, please?" "I'm in my car," she shoots back. "Why do I have to put out my cigarette?" Something shifts in the officer's voice. "Well, you can step on out now." "I don't have to step out of my car." "Step out of the car." Now he's not asking anymore. That's all it took. A minor traffic stop spirals into shouting, an arrest, and ultimately, tragedy. 3 days later, Sandra Bland is found dead in her jail cell. The video goes viral, millions of views, endless debates. How does something so small explode into something so devastating? This question sits at the heart of Malcolm Gladwell's fascinating investigation. In Talking to Strangers, one of our most gifted storytellers unpacks what really happened on that Texas roadside. And here's the kicker. It's not just about one cop and one driver. It's about something much bigger. The fundamental mistakes we all make when trying to understand people we don't know. By the time we're done here today, you'll understand the 3 hidden patterns that shape every encounter with strangers. You'll discover why the CIA got fooled by an entire network of fake spies, how Bernie Madoff ran the world's biggest fraud right under everyone's noses, and why innocent people sometimes look guilty as sin. More than that, you'll walk away with some hard-won wisdom about navigating your own encounters with strangers, with a bit more caution, a lot more humility, and maybe a healthy dose of skepticism about your own instincts. Because here's the truth. The tools we use to read each other are fundamentally broken. And it's about time we understood why. Imagine you've climbed to the top of the CIA. Your entire career hinges on one ability: reading people. Recruiting spies, testing their loyalty, sifting truth from lies. That's your job. You're basically a professional stranger whisperer. Now picture this. A guy walks into the U.S. Embassy in Vienna. Florentino Aspilaga, high-ranking officer in Cuba's intelligence service. He's defecting, and he's got a story that's about to blow everything up. He sits down with your team and starts dropping names. That agent you recruited on a ship in Antwerp? Double agent, working for Cuba the whole time. That guy with the limp in the defense ministry? Him too. One after another, he exposes nearly every single asset the United States thought it had in Cuba. They were all fake. For years, Cuba had been feeding the CIA an elaborate fiction, and the CIA had swallowed every word. The most sophisticated intelligence operation on the planet had been completely played. This incredible story kicks off the first big mystery in Gladwell's book. Why are we so spectacularly bad at spotting liars, even when it's literally our job? Enter psychologist Tim Levine with an answer that's both simple and profound. He calls it the default to truth. Here's the idea. Our brains are hardwired with a powerful assumption that the people we're talking to are being honest. Think about your daily life. When you order coffee, you don't interrogate the barista about whether they're lying about the price. When you ask for directions, you don't assume the person is deliberately sending you the wrong way. We default to believing people because, well, society would collapse otherwise. Can you imagine if every single interaction started with deep suspicion? We'd be paralyzed, unable to function. Defaulting to truth isn't a bug in the human operating system, it's a feature. But here's the downside. It makes us vulnerable. Those Cuban spies weren't acting masterclasses. They were just talking to people programmed to believe them. The CIA officers weren't idiots. They were human. We only abandon that trust when the red flags pile up so high we can't ignore them anymore. Our natural starting point isn't skepticism, it's trust. Want proof? Let's talk about Bernie Madoff, the man who pulled off history's biggest Ponzi scheme. For decades, this guy delivered impossibly consistent investment returns that defied every rule of finance. People on Wall Street whispered their doubts. They'd look at his numbers and think, this doesn't make sense. Renaissance Technologies, a major hedge fund, even investigated and concluded they couldn't figure out how he was making his money. So what did they do? Pull all their money out? Nope. They cut their investment in half. They had doubts, but not enough doubts. They defaulted to truth. After all, this was Bernie Madoff, former NASDAQ chairman, pillar of the financial establishment, surrounded by regulators and auditors. If he were a complete fraud, surely someone would have caught him by now. They assumed the system worked, and that the guy in front of them was basically legit. But there was one person who didn't default to truth, a financial investigator from Boston named Harry Markopolos. When he looked at Madoff's numbers in the late 1990s, he didn't just have doubts. He went straight to certainty. It's a Ponzi scheme, he told anyone who'd listen. For a decade, he bombarded the SEC with letters, charts, models, gift-wrapped evidence. Nobody listened. Gladwell calls Markopolos a holy fool, the outsider who sees what everyone else misses. But what made him different? His starting point. He trusted no one. Growing up watching theft in his family's restaurants, he assumed fraud lurked everywhere. And in Madoff's case, that paranoid worldview made him a hero. But here's Gladwell's crucial question. Can we all be Harry Markopolos? Should we be? The answer is no. A world full of people like him would be paralyzed by paranoia. He became so convinced Madoff's associates were after him that he started carrying a gun, checking under his car for bombs, living in constant fear. His lack of trust let him spot a con man, but it also isolated him from the world. The price we pay for occasionally getting scammed by a Madoff is having a world where communication flows, where we can coordinate and cooperate. As Gladwell puts it, defaulting to truth is actually a pretty good deal. Most of the time, it serves us brilliantly. But when it fails catastrophically. Which brings us to the heartbreaking story of Jerry Sandusky, the beloved Penn State football coach who turned out to be a serial child abuser. For years, there were whispers and reports. A young coach named Mike McQueary walked into a locker room late one night and saw Sandusky in the shower with a young boy. Shaken, he reported it to his boss, the legendary Joe Paterno. But what happened next? Did they call the police immediately? No. The reports were vague, secondhand. The incident was described as horseplay. Sandusky was a celebrated figure who'd founded a charity for troubled kids, who dedicated his life to helping youth. To believe he was a monster required believing something almost unthinkable. So they defaulted to the most innocent explanation. They defaulted to truth. Their failure wasn't a conspiracy or cover-up. It was a deeply human mistake, born of our instinct to believe in basic goodness. Like Madoff's investors, they had doubts, just not enough to overcome their fundamental assumption that people are who they appear to be. The Sandusky tragedy is a painful reminder of what that trust can cost us. So our first problem with strangers is that we're wired to believe them. But there's a second issue, maybe even deeper. Even when we are suspicious, we think we can spot deception by watching faces and body language. Gladwell calls this the illusion of transparency. Think about the TV show Friends. When Ross gets angry, his whole face scrunches up, furrowed brow, dropped jaw, squinting eyes. When Monica's happy but sad, she gives that perfect little half-smile with raised eyebrows. The actors make absolutely sure that every internal emotion gets perfectly broadcast externally. Their behavior is a crystal-clear window into their souls. And we think real life works the same way. We believe liars fidget and avoid eye contact, while honest people stay calm and look you straight in the eye. We're convinced that what we see on the outside accurately reflects what's happening inside. Except, as Gladwell powerfully shows us, this is complete fiction. The poster child for this illusion? Amanda Knox. This American student was studying in Italy when her roommate, Meredith Kircher, was murdered. The police brought Knox in for questioning, and from the start they were suspicious. Why? Her behavior. While Meredith's other friends were sobbing in corners at the police station, Knox was kissing her boyfriend, doing cartwheels. When brought to the crime scene, she slipped on the protective booties, twirled her hips, and said, "Ta-da!" The investigators watched this and thought, this is not how an innocent, grieving person acts. She must be a cold-blooded killer. The media dubbed her Foxy Knoxy, and she was convicted of murder. She spent 4 years in an Italian prison before being completely exonerated. Amanda Knox's problem was that she was mismatched, an innocent person acting guilty, quirky, awkward, emotionally unconventional. In a moment of trauma and chaos, she didn't perform grief the way we expect, and the system judged her for it. The lead investigator even said they established her guilt by closely observing the suspect's psychological and behavioral reaction. They didn't need evidence. They thought they could read her mind just by watching her. The illusion cuts both ways. We misjudge innocent people who look guilty, and we're fooled by guilty people who look innocent. Bernie Madoff came across as calm, confident, utterly trustworthy, the picture of an honest man. Neville Chamberlain flew to Germany to meet Hitler before World War II, wanting to look him in the eye and take his measure. Hitler greeted him with a warm, two-handed handshake, and Chamberlain came away convinced he'd met a man who could be relied upon when he had given his word. Hitler was a liar, with the demeanor of an honest man. He was mismatched too. Gladwell shows us that the idea of faces as universal emotion billboards is just wrong. He takes us to the Trobriand Islands near Papua New Guinea, where researchers showed islanders photos of classic Western expressions. A scowling face that we read as anger? They saw happiness or sadness. A wide-eyed, gasping face that screams fear to us? They interpreted it as threatening. Even within our own culture, transparency is a myth. German psychologists created genuinely surprising events for participants and found that only 5% made the classic surprised face with wide eyes and dropped jaw. Most people showed nothing at all. We think we can read strangers, but we really can't. Which brings us to a fascinating experiment from New York City. Researchers built a computer algorithm to predict which defendants released on bail would commit another crime. They fed it basic data, age and criminal record. Then they compared it to human judges, who had all that information plus the ability to see defendants in person, look them in the eye, observe their behavior. The result? The computer was 25% better at predicting reoffending. The extra information judges got from meeting defendants didn't help them. It hurt them. It introduced bias and noise. They were getting fooled by the illusion of transparency, jailing people who didn't look right, and releasing others who seemed trustworthy. So we default to truth, and we believe in transparency. We start with trust, and we judge with our eyes. Both tools are deeply flawed. But there's a third mistake that ties everything together. We fail to grasp how powerfully context shapes behavior. We believe behavior reflects essential character. But Gladwell argues that behavior is often intimately linked to specific times and places. He calls this coupling. The most haunting example? Poet Sylvia Plath. She took her own life in 1963 by putting her head in a gas oven. Her suicide has become legend, the doomed, brilliant artist obsessed with death. Her end felt inevitable. But Gladwell asks us to look closer, not at Plath but at her world. In mid-20th century Britain, most homes used town gas, manufactured from coal and loaded with deadly carbon monoxide. Sticking your head in a gas oven was the leading suicide method in the country, easy, painless, readily available. Then, starting in the late 1960s, Britain began switching to natural gas, which contains no carbon monoxide. The conversion took a decade. And what happened to the suicide rate? It plummeted. People who would have used their ovens didn't just switch methods. Mostly, they just didn't kill themselves at all. Sylvia Plath's suicide wasn't simply the act of a depressed person. It was the act of a depressed person at a moment of extreme vulnerability, coupled with a readily available lethal means. Born 10 years later with a natural gas stove, she might have lived. Her behavior was coupled to her context. We see this everywhere. Criminologist David Weisbrod discovered the law of crime concentration. Crime isn't spread evenly across quote 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 quote. It clusters in tiny hot spots, specific street corners or blocks that account for most of a city's crime. Criminal behavior is coupled to place. This insight sparked a policing revolution, born from an experiment in Kansas City. In the early 1990s, police felt helpless against rising violence. Previous experiments had shown random patrols did nothing, so criminologist Lawrence Sherman tried something new. He flooded the city's crime hotspots with officers and told them to be proactive, use any legal pretext, broken taillight, failure to signal, whatever, to stop cars and search for guns. The results were stunning. Gun crimes in those areas dropped by half. The lesson from Kansas City should have been that policing works when it's focused, when it understands context. But the rest of the country heard something simpler. They latched onto proactive traffic stops as the magic solution. Police departments nationwide dramatically increased traffic stops, not just in crime hotspots, but everywhere. They took a strategy designed for a very specific context and applied it universally. They ignored the power of coupling. And this brings us, finally, back to Sandra Bland. Let's look at that roadside encounter through these three lenses. First, Brian Encinia was trained in this new era of policing. He wasn't supposed to default to truth. His job was suspicion, hunting for that needle in the haystack. On a typical day, he'd write ticket after ticket for minor violations, improper mud flaps, non-compliant headlamps. He was constantly hunting. His default was suspicion. Second, he believed wholeheartedly in the illusion of transparency. When he saw Sandra Bland, he didn't see a woman new in town, starting fresh, understandably frustrated by what seemed like nothing. He saw her agitation, her aggressive body language, and read it as dangerous. He thought she might have a weapon. She was mismatched, an upset person who, to his trained but misguided eye, looked like a criminal. Third, and most critically, he ignored context. The aggressive, proactive policing strategy he was using was designed for violent, gun-ridden hotspots in Kansas City. But where was he? Prairie View, Texas, on a quiet road next to a university campus. He was using a hotspot tactic in a cold spot. The entire context was wrong. The tragedy of Sandra Bland wasn't one bad cop. It was a perfect storm of flawed assumptions about strangers. We trained an officer to be suspicious, taught him to trust his broken ability to read people, then sent him to use a powerful tactic in completely the wrong place. We don't know how to talk to strangers, and when things go wrong, as they did for Sandra Bland, we don't examine our broken tools. We blame the stranger. So what do we take from this unsettling, powerful journey with Malcolm Gladwell? The lesson isn't that we should give up on understanding each other. It's something deeper: humility. This book asks us to accept that knowing another person, especially a stranger, is genuinely difficult. We're working with flawed tools. We're wired to trust, which is beautiful and necessary, but leaves us vulnerable to deception. We're convinced we can read souls by watching faces, but demeanor is often a terrible guide to character, and we consistently underestimate how powerfully a person's situation shapes their actions. So, what should we do? First, we can be gentler with ourselves and others when trust gets violated. The parents of gymnasts abused by Larry Nassar weren't bad parents for trusting a respected doctor. Graham Spanier wasn't evil for not immediately assuming the worst about Jerry Sandusky. Defaulting to truth isn't a character flaw. It's the foundation of functioning society. The moments where that trust fails are tragic, but a world without it would be unlivable. Second, we need to approach strangers with caution and recognize our limits. We'll never have a perfect lie detector or foolproof way to read hearts. That means accepting something less than certainty. We can't know for sure if a defendant will reoffend or if a politician is lying. We can only gather what evidence we can and proceed with humble awareness that we might be wrong. Finally, we must pay far more attention to the stranger's world. Before rushing to judge character based on actions, we should ask, where are they? What rules govern their environment? What pressures are they facing? The sex workers in Jersey City weren't just prostitutes. They were mothers, daughters, friends, anchored to their community for the same reasons we all are. Sylvia Plath wasn't just a doomed poet. She was a woman living when and where a tragically easy escape was available. Context reveals complexity. Sandra Bland's death should haunt us, not because it was isolated, but because the mistakes that led to it are ones we all make. We live in an increasingly connected, complicated world. We're constantly interacting with people whose backgrounds, assumptions, and cultures differ from ours. Getting it right, learning to talk to strangers with the care, humility, and wisdom they deserve, is one of the central challenges of our time. That's our deep dive into Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. We've explored the core ideas, but honestly, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic of a Gladwell book happens when you read it yourself, in those quiet moments when a particular story or phrase connects with you unexpectedly. This summary gives you a framework for the book's powerful ideas. If anything we've discussed today has sparked your curiosity or resonated with you, I genuinely encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that can change how you see the world and the people in it. The link's in the description. Also, if you found this valuable and want to keep exploring influential books, please hit that like button and subscribe. It lets me know this work matters to you and ensures you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.